My sister's new boyfriend knew my coffee order, job, and schedule despite us never meeting. I felt cold when I realized who he was. Melanie brought her new boyfriend to Sunday dinner, and I nearly dropped the plate I was carrying when I saw him. It was the guy from the coffee shop, the one who was always there when I was. Always sitting 2 tables away. Always leaving right after me. But I'd never spoken to him. Never even made eye contact. "Hi, I'm Colton," he said, extending his hand like we'd never crossed paths. "Your sister's told me so much about you, Rachel." I shook his hand, my mind racing. Melanie was glowing. "Isn't he wonderful?" We met at that pottery class I started taking. Such a coincidence. He was the only other person under 40 there. I watched him move through our kitchen like he'd been there before. He went straight to the right cabinet for mugs, knew which drawer had spoons, poured my coffee black with 1 sugar without asking. Melanie laughed. "Look at him, already knowing how everyone takes their coffee. He's so observant." "Actually," Colton said, "Rachel and I go to the same coffee shop, Grinders on 5th Street. I've seen her there a few times. A few times. Try every morning for the past 6 months. Always at 7:15. Always ordering the same thing. Always sitting behind me where I could feel him watching." But I smiled and said nothing. Didn't want to ruin Melanie's happiness. She'd been single for 2 years, heartbroken after her ex left. During dinner, Colton kept dropping details. "Oh, Rachel, you work at that marketing firm on 8th, right? I pass it on my commute. Sometimes I see you in the window on the 3rd floor. Your desk faces the street." How did he know which floor? Which desk? I'd never mentioned my job at the coffee shop. Never worn company merchandise. "Your sister talks about you constantly," he said when he caught my look. "She's so proud of her little sister." Melanie beamed. "I do talk about you a lot. Probably too much. But Colton loves hearing about my family." After dinner, Colton helped clear plates. "Rachel, is that your blue Honda outside? The one with the National Park sticker?" I nodded slowly. Melanie doesn't have my car. Hasn't seen it since I got the sticker last month. "Oh, I've seen it around town," he said casually. "Hard to miss that sticker. Love the national parks. Which ones have you visited?" I excused myself to the bathroom, pulled out my phone, scrolled through my photos from the last few months. There, in the background of a selfie at the farmer's market. A man in a baseball cap, same build as Colton. There again at the bookstore, at the gym, always in the periphery, always just far enough away. When I came back, Colton was showing Melanie photos on his phone. "Look, babe, this is from that hiking trail I told you about, the one with the waterfall." I froze. I recognized that trail, Cascade Falls. I'd gone alone 3 weeks ago. Told no one, posted nothing. But there in his photo, in the far corner, was someone in my purple jacket, the one I only wear hiking. Melanie noticed me staring. "You should take Rachel sometime, Colton. She loves hiking." "Actually," he said, looking right at me, "I think Rachel prefers hiking alone. Early mornings, usually Sundays. Right, Rachel?" My blood went cold. He was telling me he knew my schedule, my habits, my solitary Sunday hikes that I'd never shared with anyone. Melanie squeezed his arm. "You two should be friends. You have so much in common. Both love coffee, hiking, even the same books. Rachel, didn't you just finish that mystery series? The one with the detective in Portland?" I had, but I'd bought those books with cash, read them at home, never discussed them online or with friends. How could he know? Colton smiled. "I recommended those to Melanie. She said you'd probably like them too." Guess I was right. "I saw your library card in your wallet once at Grinders. The books were on your account." My library card, in my wallet, which meant he'd been close enough to see inside it. Close enough to read the small print on a card tucked behind my license. After dessert, Melanie pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Isn't he perfect? He knows so much about you already. Makes him feel like family." "That's the thing, Mel. How does he know so much?" "We've never talked," she laughed. "I told you I never shut up about you. Plus, he's just observant. Notices things. Remembers details. It's what I love about him. But he knew about my hiking, my books, my coffee order. So, maybe you mentioned it at the coffee shop. Maybe he overheard you on the phone. Maybe it's innocent." "It's not innocent. He's been following me, watching me, for months before he met you." Melanie's face hardened. "Seriously? You can't let me have one good thing, one nice boyfriend, without making it about you?" "I'm not making it about me. He's stalking me. He's dating you to get close to me." She crossed her arms. "That's insane, and honestly offensive. You think every man is secretly obsessed with you? That my boyfriend couldn't possibly want me for me? That's not what I'm saying." "Then what are you saying? That Colton orchestrated meeting me at pottery class? That he's using me? That our entire relationship is about you?" When she put it like that, it sounded crazy, but I knew what I'd seen. The patterns, the surveillance, the calculated infiltration of my life through my sister. Colton appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay, babe? Your sister seems upset." Melanie turned to him. "Rachel thinks you're stalking her. That you're only dating me to get to her." He smiled. I looked at him standing there in Melanie's kitchen doorway with that calm smile on his face. His eyes met mine and I felt my stomach drop. He tilted his head slightly like he was concerned about me. "I understand why you'd be confused, Rachel. We do see each other at Grinders pretty often." He paused and glanced at Melanie. "But I would never follow anyone. That's a serious accusation." His voice was so reasonable and gentle that for a second I questioned myself. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe all those coincidences were just coincidences. But then I remembered the GPS tracker and the building footage and I knew I wasn't crazy. Melanie's whole body relaxed when he spoke. She turned to me with anger in her eyes instead of concern. "I'm so sorry, Colton." She touched his arm. "Rachel gets like this sometimes. Dramatic." She looked back at me. "I think you should leave. You're ruining what was a really nice evening." I opened my mouth to argue, but Colton spoke first. "I'd be happy to drive you home, Rachel. You seem upset and I wouldn't want you to be unsafe." The way he said it made my skin feel cold and tight. He was offering to get me alone in his car, to know exactly where I lived if he somehow didn't already know. No, I pulled out my phone. "I'll get a ride." I opened the app with shaking fingers and requested a car. Melanie crossed her arms and wouldn't look at me. She stood close to Colton like she was protecting him from me instead of the other way around. My ride was 7 minutes away. I grabbed my jacket from the hook by the door and stood on the front porch in the cold waiting. Through the window I could see Colton put his arm around Melanie and she leaned into him. He was looking standing at the window, looking at me, still smiling. The ride home took 15 minutes and I spent the whole time staring at my phone. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. When I got to my apartment, I locked the door and checked every window and the sliding door to my tiny balcony. Everything was locked. Everything was fine. But I didn't feel fine. I sat on my couch and opened my photo app. Started scrolling back through months of pictures. There, March 23rd at the farmer's market. I zoomed in on the background behind my friend Sarah and me. Baseball cap, dark jacket, same build as Colton. I took a screenshot. I kept scrolling. April 7th at the bookstore. I'd taken a picture of a book display. In the corner by the mystery section, there was a man looking at his phone. I zoomed in as far as the image would let me. Could be him. I took another screenshot. May 2nd at the gym. Selfie in the mirror after a workout. 3 treadmills behind me, someone was running. I zoomed in. Definitely him. Same profile. Same way of holding his shoulders. Screenshot. My hands were shaking worse now, but I kept going. I found 8 photos total. 8 different places and dates spread across 6 months. Always in the background. Always positioned where he could see me, but I wouldn't notice him. The farmer's market twice. The bookstore once. The gym 3 times. The park where I sometimes ran. Even one from the grocery store parking lot where I'd photographed a funny bumper sticker. He was there in every single one. Watching. I created a new folder on my phone and moved all the screenshots into it. Named it with today's date and the word evidence. It was almost midnight, but I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Colton in Melanie's kitchen, acting so calm and reasonable while I sounded like a paranoid mess. I thought about him offering to drive me home with that concerned voice. I thought about his smile through the window. He knew I'd figured him out and he didn't care. He had Melanie on his side now. He'd won. I finally fell asleep around 3 in the morning and woke up at 6:30 to my alarm. I stared at the ceiling for 20 minutes trying to decide if I could face going to work. Going to Grinders for coffee like always. Following my routine while Colton probably sat there waiting for me. Watching to see if I'd show up. Testing whether he'd successfully scared me into changing my patterns. I grabbed my phone and texted my boss that I was sick. Stomach bug. Wouldn't be in today. She responded right away telling me to feel better and rest. I got up and made coffee in my own kitchen for the first time in months. I usually just grabbed it on my way to work because Grinders was right by my office and making it at home felt like a waste of time. But standing there waiting for the coffee maker to finish, I felt safer than I had in the past 12 hours. I wasn't out in public where Colton could be watching. I wasn't following my predictable schedule, but I also felt like I was letting him win. Like I was hiding in my apartment because he'd successfully invaded my life. My phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. I stared at it for a long time before opening it. We need space from each other right now. Your drama and jealousy are too much for me to deal with. Another text came through. Colton was nothing but kind to you last night, and you repaid him by making wild accusations and ruining our evening. I felt tears starting, but I blinked them back. A third text. I'm happy for the first time in years, and you should be supportive instead of destructive. Please don't contact me until you're ready to apologize to both of us. I sat on my couch holding my coffee mug and staring at those texts. My sister thought I was jealous, thought I was making things up to hurt her. Colton had completely turned her against me and she couldn't see it. I wanted to text back and explain everything, but I knew it wouldn't help. She'd already decided I was the problem. I set my phone down and tried to think about who I could talk to. Who would believe me? Regina. I'd worked with her for 3 years and we'd become close friends. She knew me well enough to know I wasn't dramatic or jealous. She'd believe me. I picked up my phone and called her. She answered on the second ring asking if I was okay since I'd called in sick. I told her I needed to talk to her about something serious and asked if she could come over after work. She said she'd leave early and be there by 3. Her voice was concerned but steady, and I felt some of the tightness in my chest ease up. Regina showed up at 2:45 carrying Thai food and looking worried. I let her in and we sat at my kitchen table. I showed her everything. The photos with Colton in the background, the dates and locations, the timeline of 6 months of surveillance. I told her about the dinner and how he knew things he shouldn't know, how he'd orchestrated meeting Melanie at pottery class, how he'd smiled when she accused me of lying. Regina listened without interrupting, and her face got more serious with every detail. When I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. This is real. This is stalking. We need to document everything systematically. She pulled out her laptop. We're going to build a case that's so clear no one can deny it. Not even Melanie. I felt relief flood through me that someone finally believed me, that I wasn't alone in this anymore. We spent the next 4 hours at my kitchen table creating a document with every single detail I could remember about Colton. Every time I'd seen him at Grinders going back as far as I could recall. The first time was early November last year, almost exactly 6 months ago. He'd started showing up a few days after I'd posted about Grinders having the best coffee in the city on social media. Regina noted that down. We added the farmer's market appearances, the bookstore, the gym, the hiking trail photo. When we laid it all out chronologically, the pattern was impossible to miss. He'd been watching me for half a year. I pulled up my social media accounts on my laptop while Regina took notes. I searched for any mention of Cascade Falls before my solo hike there 3 weeks ago. Nothing on any platform. I hadn't posted about it, hadn't checked in, hadn't even told anyone I was going, which meant Colton either followed me there physically or somehow knew my plans through other surveillance. The thought made me feel sick. How close had he been while I was hiking alone thinking I was safe in nature? Regina suggested we look up Colton's online presence to see what we could learn about him. We searched every social media platform, found accounts, but they were all recent, created within the past year. Almost no personal information. A few generic posts about coffee and hiking. No tagged photos with friends. No history. His digital footprint was deliberately small. Regina said that was a red flag. Normal people have years of online history. Photos with family, old posts, something. Colton had scrubbed his past or created fake accounts just for this. I remembered my credit card statements and pulled up my banking app. Started going through transactions from the past 6 months. There, March 23rd. Grinders Coffee Shop. $8.50. months. The same day I'd been at the farmer's market where Colton appeared in my photo. I checked the timestamp. 7:23 in the morning, right when I would have been there. I kept scrolling. April 7th. Grinders again. Same amount. Same time. The day he was at the bookstore. May 2nd. Another Grinders charge. The gym day. I took screenshots of every statement and added them to our evidence folder. The pattern was undeniable now. Regina closed her laptop and looked at me with something close to fear in her eyes. She asked if I'd thought about how Colton got all this information in the first place. Maybe he didn't just watch from a distance. Maybe he got closer than that. The question made my stomach turn because I knew what she was suggesting. I grabbed my keys and told her I needed to check my apartment right now. She came with me and we drove to my building in silence. My hands shook as I unlocked my door. I walked through every room looking for signs someone had been inside. Everything looked normal at first. My books were on the shelf where I left them. My mail sat in the basket by the door. But then I noticed small things. A kitchen drawer not quite closed all the way. I never left drawers open. The closet door in my bedroom slightly ajar when I always kept it shut. My bathroom cabinet with bottles arranged differently than I remembered. Regina watched me check each room and asked what I was looking for. I told her I didn't know exactly, but something felt wrong. We searched for an hour and found nothing obvious. No cameras, no bugs, no clear signs of entry, but the feeling stayed with me that someone had touched my things, been in my space. I sat on my couch trying to remember if I always locked my door. Most days, yes. But sometimes when I ran down to grab mail or take out trash, I left it unlocked for just a minute. And my mailbox. I almost never locked that. Just shoved bills and junk mail inside. Anyone could have gone through it, pulled out bank statements, credit card offers, anything with my address and personal details. Regina said we should ask the building about security cameras, see if they caught anything. I called the property management office the next morning. The manager answered and I explained I needed to check footage from the past few months. She asked why and I hesitated. Didn't want to sound paranoid, but I told her I suspected an unauthorized person might have entered the building. She went quiet for a moment, then said they kept footage for 90 days. She'd need to review it, but could check if I gave her specific dates or descriptions. I described Colton. Tall, dark hair, usually wore jeans and casual shirts. She said it would take time to go through everything, but she'd look and call me back. 2 days passed with no word. I couldn't focus at work. Kept checking my phone. Regina texted asking if I'd heard anything. I told her not yet. Then Wednesday afternoon, my phone rang. The property manager. She said she found something concerning and I should come to the office. Her voice sounded serious. I left work early and drove to the building office. She led me to a back room with monitors showing security feeds. She pulled up saved footage and pointed at the screen. There. October 15th at 2 in the afternoon. Colton walking into my building through the front door like he owned the place. I felt cold watching him. He carried a coffee cup in one hand. Looked relaxed. Confident. The timestamp showed I would have been at work. The manager fast-forwarded. He stayed inside for 23 minutes, then left. She showed me 3 more clips. October 29th, November 12th, November 20th. Each time he entered when I wasn't home. Each time he stayed 15 to 30 minutes. Sometimes he carried shopping bags like props to blend in. The last clip showed him leaving with a satisfied expression, almost smiling. I asked the manager if she could see which floor he went to. She switched to the hallway cameras. My floor, my hallway. He stood outside my door on 2 of the visits. The angle didn't show if he went inside, but he was there, right outside my apartment. I felt sick knowing he'd been that close to my things. My bed, my private space. The manager said this was a serious security problem. Asked if I wanted her to call police. I told her I needed copies of everything first. She agreed and started burning the footage to disks. She kept apologizing, saying the building should have better security. I told her it wasn't her fault. Just please give me those copies. I took the discs to Regina's place that evening. We watched them together multiple times. Each viewing made it worse. The way Colton moved through my building so casually. How he knew exactly when I'd be gone. The shopping bags he used as cover. He'd planned this. Studied my schedule down to the hour. Regina said we should take this to police now. I wanted to, but something held me back. Colton was dating Melanie. If I went to police, it would blow up their relationship. Melanie would hate me even more. Think I was trying to destroy her happiness. But Regina pointed at the screen showing Colton outside my door. She said my safety mattered more than Melanie's feelings. I knew she was right. I told the property manager I'd handle it and asked her not to call police yet. The situation was complicated. She looked worried, but agreed. Regina spent the next day researching stalking laws while I was at work. She called me that evening with information. What Colton did met the legal definition of stalking and harassment in our state, the GPS tracker, the surveillance, following me, entering my building without permission. All of it added up to criminal behavior. She found information about restraining orders and how to file charges. But she warned me that cases involving family connections got messy. Courts moved slowly. I'd need rock-solid evidence, lawyers, possibly testimony. The process could take months. I asked what happened if he didn't stop. She said that's when it became dangerous. Stalkers who felt cornered sometimes escalated. I needed to be careful. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything Colton knew. My schedule, my habits, my routines. I grabbed a notebook and started writing it all down. Every place I went regularly. Coffee shop at 7:15 every morning. Work from 8 to 5. Gym on Tuesdays and Thursdays at 6. Grocery shopping Saturday mornings. Hiking Sunday mornings. The same routes. The same times. I'd made myself so predictable. So easy to track. Writing it out made me realize how vulnerable I'd been. How simple it was for someone watching to map my entire life. I decided I needed to change everything. Vary my schedule. Take different routes. Break the patterns he'd learned. The next morning I checked my car before driving to work. Got down on the ground and looked under the bumpers. Under the wheel wells. Nothing obvious. But I kept thinking about what I'd read online. Stalkers used GPS trackers. Small magnetic boxes that stuck to metal and transmitted location data. I called a mechanic I'd used before. Asked if he could check my car thoroughly for any tracking devices. He said to bring it in that afternoon. I took a long lunch break and drove to his shop. Explained what I was looking for without giving too many details. He put the car on a lift and started checking. 10 minutes later, he called me over, pointed under my rear bumper. There, a small black box about the size of a deck of cards. Magnetic mount. He said it was a commercial GPS tracker, the kind you could buy online and pair with a phone app. He pulled out his phone and took photos of its location before removing it, handed me both the device and his phone to see the pictures. The magnetic mount had rust around the edges. He said that meant it had been there a while. Months, probably. I held the tracker in my hand feeling sick. This thing had followed me everywhere. Recorded every trip, every location, every movement for months. Colton had watched my entire life play out on his phone screen. Regina met me at a coffee shop that evening. Not Grinders. Somewhere new. I showed her the tracker and the photos. She said this was solid evidence. Physical proof of stalking. We needed to document everything about it. I'd already done that. Photographed it from every angle. Saved the mechanic's photos. Kept the device itself in a plastic bag. Regina suggested we dig deeper into Colton's background. Find out who he really was before he came here. We pulled out our laptops right there in the coffee shop. Searched his name. Found almost nothing useful. A few social media accounts, but they were recent. Created within the past year. His LinkedIn profile listed 3 companies. Generic job titles. When we tried to verify the companies, one didn't exist at the address listed. Another had no website. The third looked legitimate, but had no employee directory. His whole professional history seemed fake. Regina said that was a major red flag. Normal people had years of digital history. Old posts, tagged photos, employment records you could verify. Colton had scrubbed his past or built a fake identity just for this. Either way, it meant he was hiding something. Something bad enough that he needed to erase who he'd been before. I remembered Melanie mentioning pottery class during dinner. The place where she supposedly met him by chance. I pulled up my phone and searched for pottery studios in the area. Found one called Clay Works about 10 minutes from her apartment. Called them the next morning pretending I wanted to sign up for classes. The woman who answered sounded friendly and helpful. I asked about the beginner classes and what the typical student was like. She laughed and said it was mostly retirees except for one evening class that had a few younger people. I asked when that class met and she said Wednesdays at 7, the same time Melanie went. I kept my voice casual and asked how long the class had been running. She said about 4 months now. Then I asked if spots filled up quickly or if new people joined regularly. She said they got a new student every few weeks usually. A man had joined in late July and then a woman in early August. My stomach dropped. Late July was 2 weeks before Melanie started in August. Not the same time like Colton claimed. I thanked her and hung up. Pulled out my evidence folder and added a note about the timeline discrepancy. Colton had lied about already being enrolled when Melanie arrived. He joined specifically 2 weeks before her. Researched her, planned it. I called back an hour later with a different question. Asked if I could speak to the instructor about what to expect from the class. The same woman transferred me. The instructor picked up and I introduced myself as someone interested in signing up. Asked what I should bring and how the classes worked. She explained the basics and I asked about the current students to get a sense of the group dynamic. She mentioned that most students were retired folks who came for the social aspect as much as the pottery. Then she said something interesting. The younger man who joined in July had asked a lot of questions before signing up. Questions about who attended and when different people usually arrived. She remembered because most people just asked about the class content and schedule. He seemed more interested in the other students than the actual pottery. I felt cold. That was Colton, researching Melanie before he ever spoke to her. I thanked the instructor and ended the call. Added detailed notes to my evidence file about both conversations. The timeline proved Colton had joined 2 weeks early. The instructor's memory proved he'd been asking about other students. About Melanie specifically, even if she didn't realize it at the time. This wasn't coincidence. This was planning. Calculation. I tried calling Melanie again. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. I kept my voice steady and calm. Asked her to please call me back. Said I needed to talk to her about something important. Told her I had information about Colton that she needed to hear. Please just meet me somewhere public to talk. I didn't mention the pottery class details because I was afraid she'd tell him everything. He'd have time to prepare explanations. Twist the facts. Make me look crazy again. I hung up and waited. Checked my phone every few minutes for the rest of the day. Nothing. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Melanie. It was long. Said she'd talked to Colton about my call and he was really hurt that I was trying to wreck their relationship. Said he'd explained that his therapist recommended pottery class for stress relief from his job. The timing of meeting her was pure coincidence. She wrote that I needed to stop harassing them or she'd have to cut contact with me completely. Said she loved me, but she couldn't let me destroy the first good thing that had happened to her in years. The text ended with a request that I respect her boundaries and leave them alone. I read it 3 times. Felt the distance between us growing. Colton was winning, turning her against me, making her think I was the problem. I wanted to text back with all the evidence. The pottery timeline, the instructor's memory, the GPS tracker, the building footage. But Detective Rasmussen's advice echoed in my head. Melanie wouldn't believe me until she saw proof herself. Confronting her now would just push her further into his arms. I put my phone down and gathered all my evidence. Every photo, every document, every timeline, every piece of proof I'd collected over the past weeks. Put it all in a folder and drove to the police station. The officer at the front desk looked up when I walked in. I asked to speak with someone about a stalking case. He asked me to explain the situation. I told him about Colton, about the 6 months of surveillance, about him dating my sister to get close to me. The officer's expression shifted from professional interest to skepticism. He asked if there had been any threats or violence. I said no, but explained the GPS tracker and building footage. He took down my information and said he'd file a report. Then he added that without direct threats or physical violence, there was limited action they could take right away. I felt my hope deflating. Asked what I was supposed to do while Colton had access to my sister and continued watching me. The officer said he understood my concern, but the law required certain thresholds before they could intervene. He took my statement and all my evidence. Said someone from the detective unit would contact me. I left feeling frustrated and scared. The system that was supposed to protect me needed me to be in more danger before it would act. 2 days passed. I varied my routine like Regina suggested, took different routes to work, went to a new coffee shop, checked my car every morning for new tracking devices, jumped at every unexpected sound. Then my phone rang with an unknown number. I answered cautiously. A woman's voice introduced herself as Detective Christina Rasmussen from the Stalking Investigations Unit. Her voice was professional but had warmth underneath. She said she'd reviewed my case file and wanted me to come in with all my evidence. Said she'd handled cases like this before where the stalker infiltrated the victim's family or social circle. Asked if I could come to the station that afternoon. I said yes immediately. Felt a wave of relief that someone was taking this seriously. That afternoon, I sat across from Detective Rasmussen in a small interview room. She was maybe 40 with sharp eyes that missed nothing. I spread out everything I'd gathered on the table between us. The photos with Colton in the background, the timeline of sightings, the building security footage, the GPS tracker in its plastic bag, the pottery class information, the credit card receipts showing we'd been in the same places. She reviewed each piece carefully, asked questions about dates and locations, took notes in a small notebook. When I finished presenting everything, she looked up and said I'd done excellent work documenting the stalking. Said most victims didn't have this level of evidence. It would help build a strong case. She explained that what Colton was doing had a name: predatory stalking. His infiltration of my family was a calculated move that showed how invested he was. She said these cases were dangerous because the stalker had put in significant time and effort. That meant he was unlikely to stop without legal intervention. She asked if I'd noticed any increase in his behavior recently, any escalation. I told her about his smile at dinner when Melanie accused me, about how confident he seemed, how he knew Melanie would choose him over me. Detective Rasmussen's expression darkened. She said that confidence was very concerning. It suggested he'd been working on Melanie's perception of me for a while, probably sharing selective information, planting seeds of doubt about my mental state, setting up a situation where anything I said would sound like jealousy or instability. I felt sick hearing it laid out so clearly. She said she'd start a formal investigation right away, but she warned me it would take time to gather enough evidence for criminal charges or a restraining order. She advised me to keep varying my routines, install security cameras if I hadn't already, document any contact with Colton, including indirect contact through Melanie. Then she said something that hurt to hear. I might need to accept that Melanie wouldn't believe me until she saw evidence herself, that sometimes victims of this kind of manipulation had to come to the truth on their own timeline. I left the station feeling both validated and terrified. Someone official finally believed me, but the process would be slow. And meanwhile, Colton was still out there, still with my sister, still watching, still planning whatever came next. I left the station and drove straight to the hardware store. Bought a 4-camera security system with night vision and motion alerts. The guy at the counter asked if I was worried about package thieves. I said something like that. Back at my apartment, I spent 3 hours installing cameras. One pointed at my door, one at my parking space, one at the mailbox area, one at the building entrance. I downloaded the app and tested each angle, clear views of everything. My hands shook the whole time I worked. Every footstep in the hallway made me freeze, but I got it done. At least now I'd have proof if he came near my building again. Regina called that night and asked how the police visit went. I told her about the detective believing me and starting an investigation. Regina said that was good, but asked what else we could do while waiting for the legal stuff to move forward. I mentioned that all my evidence showed the stalking patterns, but we knew almost nothing about who he actually was. Regina got quiet for a second. Then she said she had a friend who works in corporate background checks, someone who could verify if the jobs on his LinkedIn were real. I felt a rush of hope. Yes, do it, please. 2 days later, Regina texted me to call her right away. I dialed immediately. Her friend had checked the companies on his profile. One of them didn't exist at the address he listed. The building there was a dentist office and had been for 10 years. Another company had no record of anyone named Colton working there, ever. Their HR department went back through 5 years of employment records and found nothing. Regina's voice was tight when she said his entire work history looked fake, which raised a huge question. How was he paying rent? Buying groceries? Living his life? I felt cold. If his background was made up, then what else was he hiding? Regina came over that evening and we sat at my kitchen table going through everything again. She pulled up his LinkedIn on her laptop. The profile looked normal. Professional photo. List of marketing positions at different companies. Skills and endorsements. But now we knew at least 2 of those companies were lies. I suggested maybe he was using a fake name, but Regina shook her head. Melanie would have seen his driver's license. His real ID. We stared at the screen trying to figure it out. Maybe he worked under the table. Construction jobs. Restaurant work. Cash payments. Or maybe he had income we didn't know about. Inheritance. Investments. Illegal stuff. Regina closed her laptop and looked at me. The gaps in his history made him more dangerous, because we had no idea what he was actually capable of. No way to predict what he might do next. That night, I logged into my bank account and checked every transaction from the past 6 months. Nothing weird. No unauthorized charges. No strange withdrawals. I pulled up my credit report next. Scanned through every line. All the accounts were mine. No new credit cards. No loans I didn't recognize. Everything looked normal. But I wasn't taking chances. I changed every password I had. Email, banking, social media, work accounts, streaming services, everything. I set up 2-factor authentication on all of them. Added my phone number for verification codes. Then I went to the credit bureau website and put a fraud alert on my file. Anyone trying to open credit in my name would trigger extra verification. It took 2 hours to secure everything. My eyes hurt from staring at screens, but it was done. 3 days later, I was at work when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from my security cameras. I opened the app. The timestamp showed it was from yesterday evening. The footage showed someone walking slowly past my building. I zoomed in. Colton. He was on the sidewalk across the street, moving at half normal speed, looking up at the windows, studying the building like he was checking something. He didn't try to approach approach. Didn't cross the street, just walked past very slowly with his head tilted up. Then he was gone. I checked the other cameras. Nothing. I scrolled back through the previous days of footage. There. 4 days ago. Same thing. Colton walking past. Same slow pace. Same upward stare. I saved both videos and emailed them to Detective Rasmussen with shaking hands. Subject line, he's watching my building. Detective Rasmussen called me 20 minutes later. Her voice was sharp and focused. She'd watched the videos. Said his behavior was getting worse. He was checking to see if I'd changed my routine. Testing my patterns. She told me she was working on getting approval for a restraining order. The evidence we had was strong enough now. GPS tracker, building footage, coffee shop surveillance, his fake employment history, and now this. Videos of him circling my home. She said the restraining order would legally prohibit him from coming near me or contacting me, but then her voice got serious. Serving him with that order might make things worse before they got better. It would threaten his access to both me and Melanie. Stalkers sometimes reacted badly when their control was challenged. I needed to be ready for him to do something unpredictable, maybe even dangerous. That afternoon, I got a friend request on social media. The account had no profile picture, just a gray silhouette. The name was Jennifer Anderson. I didn't recognize it. Something felt wrong immediately. I took a screenshot. Then I clicked on the profile, created 3 days ago. No posts, no photos, no information except the name. I checked the friends list. Empty. I looked at who else this account had tried to add. 3 of my coworkers, my college roommate, 2 people from my gym, all people connected to me. My stomach dropped. I blocked the account, reported it to the platform for fake identity. Then I sent the screenshot to Detective Rasmussen. Told her I thought it might be him trying to monitor me through a fake profile. She replied within minutes. Good instinct. Save everything. Regina texted me the next morning. She'd gone to Grinders for coffee before work. The manager had pulled her aside and asked if I was okay. Regina asked why. The manager said a guy had been in twice last week asking questions about me, saying he was my sister's boyfriend and wanted to surprise me with my favorite drink. He'd asked what time I usually came in, whether I met anyone there, if I always sat in the same spot. The manager thought it was weird that he knew so much about me, but was asking for more details. She'd told him she couldn't give out information about customers, but she wanted to make sure I knew someone was asking around. Regina thanked her and left. Then she called me. I felt sick hearing it. He was still gathering information, still tracking my movements, even with a police investigation happening. Even knowing I'd figured him out, he wasn't stopping. My email notification chimed that afternoon. Message from Melanie. Subject line, I'm worried about you. I opened it with my heart pounding. The email was long. She said she'd been thinking about our argument, about my accusations against Colton. She was concerned about my mental state. My behavior lately seemed paranoid and obsessive. She thought I might need professional help, therapy maybe, or medication for anxiety. The phrases sounded wrong, too formal, too clinical. She wrote about my concerning behavior and getting help before it's too late. Those exact words. I read it 3 times. This wasn't how Melanie talked. Someone had coached her, told her what to write, probably sat next to her while she typed it. I could practically hear his voice in every sentence. He was positioning himself as the worried, caring boyfriend, making me look unstable, isolating me from my own sister by convincing her I was the problem, not him, me. I forwarded Melanie's email to Detective Rasmussen with shaking hands. She called me back within an hour. Her voice was calm, but firm when she told me not to engage with the content of what Melanie wrote. She said Colton was coaching my sister, feeding her lines to make me look unstable. The detective advised me to respond carefully, keeping my tone gentle and focused on concern for Melanie, rather than accusations about Colton. She said I should suggest meeting for coffee, just the 2 of us, without mentioning the investigation or any evidence I'd gathered. Detective Rasmussen explained that maintaining some connection with Melanie was important because I might be her only lifeline when she eventually recognized Colton's true nature. She warned me that Melanie probably wouldn't agree to meet, but the offer itself would plant a seed that I was still there for her, still reaching out despite everything. I spent an hour writing and rewriting the email to Melanie. Every version felt wrong, either too cold or too desperate. Finally, I settled on something simple. I told her I loved her and I was worried about her. I said I wanted to meet just the 2 of us to talk, without anyone else involved. I kept my tone gentle and didn't mention Colton's name once. Didn't reference any of my evidence or the police investigation. Just sister to sister, please let me see you. I hit send before I could second guess myself again. Then I waited. 1 day passed, then 2, then 3. My phone stayed silent except for work emails and texts from Regina checking on me. On the 4th day, Melanie finally responded. The message was short. She said she was too busy with work and spending time with Colton to meet up right now. Maybe in a few weeks when things calmed down. The words felt distant and formal, nothing like how my sister usually talked to me. I showed the email to Detective Rasmussen and she sighed. She said this was expected, that Colton was keeping Melanie occupied and isolated, so she wouldn't have time to think clearly about the situation. Regina called me that evening with news. She'd been digging through social media, looking for anyone else from Melanie's pottery class who might have witnessed Colton's behavior before he approached my sister. She found a guy named Hunter who'd been in the class around the same time. Regina sent him a message explaining she was asking about Colton on behalf of a friend, keeping my name out of it initially. Hunter responded the next morning. His message made my stomach drop. He said Colton had made him uncomfortable from the start because he asked so many personal questions about Melanie before ever talking to her. Hunter described how Colton would ask about Melanie's schedule, whether she came to class alone, if she was dating anyone. He said it felt like Colton was researching her, gathering information before making his move. Hunter thought it was weird at the time but didn't say anything because he didn't want to assume the worst about someone. Regina forwarded me the screenshots and I immediately sent them to Detective Rasmussen. This was another piece of evidence showing Colton's pattern of stalking and manipulation. Regina convinced Hunter to meet with me in person. We chose a coffee shop on the other side of town, nowhere near Grinders or any place Colton might be. Hunter showed up looking nervous. nervous, glancing around like he was worried someone might see him. He was younger than I expected, maybe mid-20s, with paint stains on his jeans from whatever art project he'd been working on. I thanked him for agreeing to meet, and he shrugged, saying he'd been thinking about Colton's behavior ever since Regina reached out. Hunter told me that Colton showed up to pottery class early for 2 full weeks, always positioning himself where he could watch the door and see Melanie arrive. He said Colton never seemed interested in the actual pottery, barely touched the clay, just watched and waited. Hunter remembered specific questions Colton asked him: whether Melanie came alone or with friends, if she stayed after class to talk to anyone, whether she mentioned having a boyfriend. Hunter said he answered some of the questions at first, trying to be friendly, but then it started feeling invasive and he stopped engaging with Colton. He thought it was strange that this guy was so focused on one particular woman in the class, but figured maybe Colton was just shy about approaching her directly. I asked Hunter if he'd be willing to talk to Melanie about what he observed. His face changed immediately, pulling back in his chair. He said he didn't want to get involved in relationship drama, didn't want to be the person who caused problems between a couple. I understood his reluctance, but pulled out my phone and showed him some of the evidence I'd gathered. The photos of Colton in my backgrounds, the GPS tracker, the building security footage. Hunter's expression shifted from uncomfortable to horrified as he scrolled through everything. He looked up at me with wide eyes and said he had no idea it was this serious. But even seeing all that, he still wasn't ready to contact Melanie himself. He said if she reached out to him, he'd tell her the truth, but he couldn't be the one to initiate that conversation. I gave him my contact information and asked him to let me know if he changed his mind or if he noticed anything else concerning about Colton's behavior. He promised he would and left the coffee shop quickly, like being associated with this situation made him nervous. Detective Rasmussen called 2 days later with news that made my heart race. She'd obtained approval for a restraining order against Colton. The GPS tracker, the building surveillance footage, and the pattern of stalking behavior over 6 months provided enough evidence for the court to issue the order. She explained that it would prohibit Colton from contacting me or coming within 500 feet of my home or workplace. The detective's voice got serious when she warned me again that this would likely cause a crisis in his relationship with Melanie. Colton would have to explain why he was served with a restraining order, and he'd probably spin the story to make me look like the aggressor. Detective Rasmussen said I should prepare for Melanie to react badly at first, to believe whatever story Colton told her. But she also said that sometimes the restraining order itself plants doubt in people's minds, makes them start questioning things they'd previously accepted. She told me the order would be served within 48 hours, and I should make sure my security system was working properly. The day before the restraining order was served, I sent Melanie one more email. I kept it short and simple. I told her I loved her and that no matter what happened in the next few days, I was here for her when she needed me. I didn't explain what was coming or mention the legal action. Detective Rasmussen had specifically advised me not to give Colton any warning that something was imminent. The element of surprise was important, she said, because it would prevent him from crafting a careful narrative before Melanie saw the restraining order paperwork. I hit send and then sat staring at my phone, wondering if my sister would even read it or if Colton was monitoring her email now too. I went to Grinder's coffee shop that afternoon and asked to speak with the manager. She recognized me immediately, had seen me there almost every morning for years. I explained that I was involved in a police investigation and needed access to their security footage from the past 6 months. The manager's face went serious and she asked if this was about the guy who'd been asking questions about me. I nodded and she disappeared into the back office. She returned with a laptop and several external hard drives containing archived footage. She said she'd been hoping I'd come in because something about that guy's questions had bothered her, the way he pretended to be concerned while asking such specific things about my habits and schedule. She gave me access to copy whatever footage I needed and said to let her know if there was anything else she could do to help. I called Regina and she came straight over. We moved to a corner table with the laptop and started reviewing months of security camera footage. The footage revealed patterns that made me feel sick. Colton arrived at the coffee shop before me almost every single morning, sometimes by just 5 minutes, sometimes by 15. He'd positioned himself at a table where he could observe the entrance and my usual spot without being obvious. The camera angles showed him watching me constantly, his eyes following me as I ordered, as I sat down, as I worked on my laptop. On several occasions, the footage caught him photographing me with his phone when I wasn't looking. He'd hold the phone casually, like he was checking messages, but the angle was clearly aimed at me. Regina and I documented every instance with timestamps and screenshots. We marked each date when Colton appeared, noting his arrival time relative to mine, and how long he stayed after I left. The pattern was undeniable and extensive. This wasn't someone who happened to be at the same coffee shop occasionally. This was someone who structured his entire morning routine around watching me. We found footage from 3 different days showing Colton following me out of the coffee shop. The camera above the entrance caught him waiting until I was half a block away before leaving, then walking the same direction I went. He stayed far enough back that I wouldn't notice him, but close enough to track where I was going. On one particular morning in late September, the footage showed him following me all the way to my office building. The timestamp read 7:43, right when I usually arrived at work. Another camera angle from across the street, part of the city's traffic monitoring system that the police had accessed, showed Colton standing on the corner for 10 minutes after I went inside. He just stood there watching the building, looking up at the 3rd floor windows where my desk was. This evidence was damning. It showed clear, documented stalking behavior over months. Regina and I compiled everything into a detailed report with timestamps, screenshots, and written descriptions of each incident. I sent it all to Detective Rasmussen that night, and she responded immediately saying this was exactly what they needed to strengthen the case against him. Detective Rasmussen called me the next afternoon after reviewing everything we'd compiled from Grinders. Her voice had this edge to it that wasn't there before, like she'd seen something that changed how she viewed the whole case. Yes, the coffee shop footage is exactly what we needed, she told me. It shows clear stalking behavior over months with documented patterns. I'm adding it to the evidence file right now. She paused and I heard papers shuffling on her end. I'm also running Colton's information through databases in other states, checking for stalking complaints or harassment reports. Sometimes these guys have a history we can use to build the case stronger. I thanked her and hung up, feeling this weird mix of validation and dread. Validation because someone with authority finally saw what I'd been seeing. Dread because if Colton had done this before, that meant I wasn't special or unique to him. I was just another target in a pattern. 2 days passed where I barely slept, jumping at every notification on my phone. Then Detective Rasmussen called again, and I knew from her tone she'd found something. We located a complaint filed against Colton in another state 3 years ago, she said. A woman reported stalking behavior that matches what he's done to you almost exactly. The case was dropped when she moved away and decided not to pursue charges, but the report is detailed. Coffee shop surveillance following her to work, showing up at places she frequented. Even the part about infiltrating her social circle to get closer. My stomach dropped. What was her name? Detective Rasmussen hesitated. I can't share victim information, but I can tell you the pattern is identical. Same methods, same escalation, same confidence. This helps us significantly because it shows this isn't a one-time thing or a misunderstanding. This is calculated behavior he's done before. The detective explained she was moving forward with the restraining order and would have it served to Colton at his apartment when Melanie wasn't there. She wanted to avoid a scene where Melanie would be present and potentially interfere or tip him off. I'll text you when it's done, she said. Be prepared for things to escalate quickly after he's served. Men like Colton don't respond well to losing control. I spent the entire day after that call pacing my apartment, checking my phone every few minutes. I couldn't focus on work or TV or anything except waiting for that text. Regina called twice to check on me, but I could barely hold a conversation. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed. Restraining order served. Colton was calm when officers arrived, but his expression suggested he's already planning his next move. Stay alert. I read the message 3 times, my hands shaking. 3 hours later, my security camera alert went off. I pulled up the app on my phone, and there he was. Colton standing across the street from my building, staring up at my windows. He wasn't hiding or trying to be subtle. He just stood there in plain view, hands in his pockets, looking up at the 3rd floor where my apartment was. The camera timestamp showed he'd been there for 15 minutes already. His body language was different from I'd ever seen it before. Aggressive, entitled, like he was making a point by being there despite the restraining order that had been served just hours earlier. I called Detective Rasmussen immediately, and she answered on the first ring. He's outside my building right now, I said, my voice coming out higher than normal, just standing there staring at my windows. She told me to stay inside and lock my doors. She was dispatching officers to my location right away. I watched through the camera as Colton continued standing there, not moving, not looking away from my building. Then suddenly he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner just as I heard sirens in the distance. By the time police arrived, Colton was gone, but I had the security footage showing him standing there for 20 minutes. The officers took my statement and copied the video files. One of them, a younger guy with kind eyes, told me this was clear evidence of violating the restraining order within hours of being served. Detective Rasmussen called me after the officers left. This footage is perfect, she said. Clear violation, clear intent, shows he has no respect for legal boundaries. This will result in criminal charges and likely his arrest. Where are you right now? Are you somewhere safe? I told her I was at my apartment, and she made this sound like that wasn't good enough. I want you to stay with Regina for a few days while we locate and arrest him. He's shown he'll come to your building despite the order. That makes him dangerous and unpredictable. Pack a bag and go now. I threw clothes into a duffel bag with shaking hands, grabbed my laptop and chargers, and drove to Regina's apartment building across town. Her place had a doorman and better security than mine, cameras in the lobby and elevator, key card access to get past the front desk. She buzzed me up immediately when I called from downstairs and met me at her door with a hug that made me finally start crying. You're staying as long as you need, she said firmly. No arguments. We set up the guest room and I tried to settle in, but I couldn't stop checking my phone, waiting for news about Colton's arrest. Regina made dinner, but I barely ate. That night, I lay in her guest bed staring at the ceiling, jumping at every sound from the hallway or street below. My phone sat on the nightstand with the volume turned all the way up so I wouldn't miss a call. The next morning, Detective Rasmussen called at 7:30. We arrested Colton at 6 this morning at his apartment, she said. He's being held on charges of stalking, violation of a restraining order, and unlawful surveillance. He'll be arraigned later today. I sat up in bed, relief flooding through me so fast I felt dizzy. Is he still in custody? Yes, she confirmed. But there's something you should know. Melanie was there when we arrested him. She was shocked and confused about what was happening. She kept asking the officers what Colton had done and why they were taking him. I closed my eyes. Of course Melanie was there. Of course she saw him get arrested and had no idea why. An hour later, my phone rang with Melanie's name on the screen. I answered and she was already crying. What did you do? Her voice was angry and hurt and confused all at once. Why did police arrest Colton at my place this morning? What is happening, Rachel? I took a breath and tried to keep my voice steady. I need to show you everything in person, I said. Can you meet me at Regina's apartment? I'm staying here for a few days. I need you to see all the evidence I've gathered. She was quiet for a moment and I could hear her breathing hard like like she was trying not to cry more. "You destroyed my relationship," she said finally. "You couldn't stand to see me happy, so you made up lies and got him arrested. But fine, I'll come see your so-called evidence. I'll be there in an hour." She hung up before I could respond. Melanie arrived at Regina's building looking like she hadn't slept, her eyes red and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. Regina buzzed her up and she walked into the apartment with her arms crossed, defensive and ready for a fight. "I'm here," she said. "Show me whatever lies you've come up with." I gestured to the dining table where I'd laid out everything. The printed photos showing Colton in the background of my pictures from different locations over months. The GPS tracker the mechanic had removed from my car with photos of where it was attached. The building security footage showing Colton entering my apartment building 4 times when I wasn't home. The coffee shop surveillance showing him watching me every morning for 6 months. The timeline Regina and I had created with dates and locations. Melanie stood at the edge of the table, not moving closer. I walked her through it piece by piece, keeping my voice calm and factual. "This is from the farmer's market in August. That's Colton in the background. This is from the bookstore in September. That's him again. Here's the GPS tracker that was on my car for months. Here's footage of him in my building. Here's surveillance from Grinders showing him following me out 4 different mornings." I watched her face as she processed what she was seeing. The defensive anger started cracking, replaced by confusion, and then something that looked like fear. Regina stepped in and showed Melanie the employment verification we'd done. "The companies Colton listed don't exist or have no record of him," she explained. "He fabricated his entire work history, and the pottery class instructor confirmed he joined 2 weeks before you did and asked questions about your schedule before signing up. He researched you specifically before engineering your meeting." Right then my phone rang. It was Hunter Berg calling. I put him on speaker. "Hunter," I said. "Melanie's here with me." He sounded uncomfortable but determined. "I saw the news about Colton's arrest online. I needed to call because I feel guilty I didn't say something earlier. Melanie, before Colton ever talked to you at pottery class, he asked me all these questions about you. When you usually arrived, whether you came alone, if you were dating anyone. He was researching you for 2 weeks before he approached you. I thought it was weird, but I didn't want to assume the worst about someone. I'm sorry I didn't warn you." Melanie's face had gone pale. The weight of all the evidence spread across the table. Regina's investigation results and Hunter's direct testimony became impossible to deny. She sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. I sat down next to her and wrapped my arms around her while she sobbed into my shoulder. Her whole body shook and I could feel her tears soaking through my shirt. She kept saying she was sorry over and over between gasps for air. I pulled her closer and told her this wasn't her fault. "He planned this. He studied you before he ever spoke to you. He knew exactly what to say to make you trust him." She cried harder and I just held her until the worst of it passed. Regina brought over a box of tissues and sat down on Melanie's other side. We stayed like that for a long time, the 3 of us on the couch surrounded by all the evidence of what he'd done. When Melanie could finally talk again, her voice came out rough and broken. She told me that over the past few weeks, Colton had been saying things about me in their conversations. Little comments that seemed harmless at first. He'd mention how I always needed attention, or how I had a pattern of getting jealous when Melanie dated someone. He told her I'd caused problems in her last relationship too, calling her ex constantly and making drama. None of that was true. I'd barely known her ex and we'd only talked a few times. But Melanie said Colton was so gentle about it, so concerned. He made it sound like he was worried about me, like he cared about our whole family. She wiped her eyes with another tissue. "He said you'd been through something traumatic a few years ago that made you paranoid and possessive. He never said what it was specifically, just hinted that you weren't stable. When I asked him how he knew, he said you'd mentioned it at the coffee shop once when you were on the phone." I felt sick hearing this. He'd been building a story about me in Melanie's head for weeks, making her doubt me before I ever said a word. She looked at me with red, swollen eyes. "I believed him because it explained why you were acting so strange at dinner. He made it seem like you were having an episode, like you needed help but wouldn't accept it. I'm so sorry." I told her again that he was good at this, that he'd manipulated her on purpose. Regina added that predators like Colton are experts at isolating their targets from anyone who might protect them. Melanie nodded, but I could tell she was still beating herself up. She said there were other signs she ignored because she wanted the relationship to work so badly. He always knew where she was, even when she didn't tell him her plans. He'd show up at places she went, acting surprised to see her. He asked a lot of questions about her friends and family, taking mental notes about everyone. She remembered now how he'd steered conversations back to me constantly, asking what I liked, where I went, what my schedule was like. She'd thought he was trying to bond with her family. Now she realized he was gathering information. She put her head in her hands. I was so lonely after my ex left. 2 years of being alone and feeling like nobody wanted me. Then Colton came along and he was perfect. He said all the right things. He made me feel special and interesting and like I mattered. I ate it up because I was desperate. I ignored every weird thing because I didn't want to be alone anymore. I told her that was exactly what he counted on. He researched her before pottery class. He knew she'd been single for 2 years. He used her vulnerability against her. Melanie's phone rang and she jumped. It was Detective Rasmussen calling. Melanie put it on speaker with shaking hands. The detective's voice was calm and professional. She said they'd finished searching Colton's apartment and found extensive documentation about me. There were printed photos of me from different locations over the past year. Some I recognized from my own social media, and others that must have been taken when he was following me. He had a notebook with my daily schedule written out, noting what time I left for work, when I went to the gym, my usual grocery shopping day. There were notes about my car, my apartment building, the coffee shop, everything. Detective Rasmussen paused. She said they also found similar materials about 2 other women, one in the city where he'd lived before, and another from a town about 50 miles away. The evidence suggested I wasn't his only target, and that he had a pattern of this behavior. The prosecutor was confident they could charge him with multiple counts of stalking, and the case was strong. Melanie's face went white. She asked if the other women were okay, and Detective Rasmussen said they were being contacted now. Both cases had gone unreported because the women didn't realize the full extent of what was happening until he moved on. Melanie covered her mouth with her hand. After Detective Rasmussen hung up, Melanie sat in silence for a minute. Then she said she couldn't go back to her apartment. The thought of being in that space where Colton had been, where he'd slept next to her and pretended to care about her while using her to get to me, made her feel sick. She asked if she could stay with Regina and me for a while. Regina immediately said yes and offered to help her get her things. I called Detective Rasmussen back and she arranged for an officer to meet Melanie at her apartment building. An hour later, Melanie left with Regina and the officer to pack up her essentials. I stayed behind because I didn't want to risk running into anyone who might know Colton. They came back 2 hours later with 3 suitcases and several boxes. Melanie's face was pale and she looked exhausted. She said being in that apartment felt wrong now, like the whole place was contaminated by his lies. She couldn't stop thinking about all the nights he'd been there, all the conversations they'd had where he was pretending to care about her while really obsessing over me. Regina set up the guest room for her, and Melanie collapsed on the bed fully clothed. Over the next few days, we settled into a routine at Regina's place. Melanie mostly stayed in the guest room, processing everything. She met with Detective Rasmussen twice to give detailed statements about Colton's behavior during their relationship. She told the detective about the questions he'd asked about me, the comments he'd made, the times he'd steered conversations toward my life and schedule. She provided text messages where he'd asked about my plans or my daily routine. Her testimony added more evidence to the case against him. One afternoon, Melanie was looking through her phone when she suddenly went very still. She called me into the guest room and showed me her phone's activity log. There were dozens of entries showing late-night access to her messaging apps, her photo gallery, and her email. Times when she'd been asleep and hadn't opened those apps herself. Colton had been going through her phone while she slept, reading our text conversations, looking at photos of me and our family, gathering information. She felt violated all over again, knowing he'd used her as an unwitting spy. She said she'd wake up sometimes and find her phone on the nightstand in a slightly different position than where she'd left it, but she'd dismissed it as nothing. Now she knew he'd been systematically mining her phone for details about my life. My phone rang while we were looking at her activity log. It was Detective Rasmussen calling with an update. She said Colton had been formally charged with multiple felonies including stalking, unlawful surveillance, violation of a restraining order, and harassment. His bail was set at $50,000 because the judge considered him a flight risk and a danger to me specifically. The prosecutor's office was building a comprehensive case using all the evidence we'd gathered, plus what they'd found in his apartment. Detective Rasmussen said if convicted on all charges, Colton could face up to 8 years in prison. The case was strong and they expected him to either accept a plea deal or lose at trial. I felt relief wash over me hearing that he was being held and couldn't get to either of us. The next day, I met with a victim's advocate at the courthouse. She was a woman in her 40s who specialized in stalking cases. She walked me through what to expect during the legal process, explaining each step from arraignment to potential trial. She gave me information about my rights as a victim, including the right to make a statement at sentencing if the case went that far. She connected me with a therapist who worked specifically with stalking victims and helped me develop safety plans for different scenarios. What to do if Colton made bail, how to vary my routines, who to contact if I felt unsafe. She assured me the evidence against him was substantial and that cases with this much documentation rarely ended in acquittal. I left her office feeling more prepared but also more aware of how long this process would take. 2 weeks later, Melanie and I went to our first therapy session together. We met with a therapist who specialized in trauma and family relationships. She had us sit across from each other and talk about what we'd each experienced. Melanie cried through most of it, apologizing again for not believing me and for letting Colton manipulate her. The therapist stopped her gently and explained that Melanie was a victim too. Colton had targeted her specifically because of her connection to me. He'd researched her vulnerability and loneliness, then used it to manipulate her into giving him access to my life. The therapist said perpetrators like Colton are skilled at finding and exploiting emotional weak points. Melanie wasn't stupid or gullible for falling for his act. She was human and lonely, and he took advantage of that deliberately. We spent the rest of the session working on communication strategies and rebuilding trust. The therapist helped us identify patterns in how we'd handled conflict before Colton, and how we could do better going forward. We both committed to being more honest with each other and trusting each other's instincts even when it was uncomfortable. By the end of the session, I felt closer to Melanie than I had in months. 3 months passed while the legal system worked through Colton's case. The prosecutor called me one afternoon and explained that Colton's lawyer approached them about a plea deal. He would accept 4 years in prison, mandatory counseling for his stalking behavior, and a permanent restraining order against both me and Melanie. The prosecutor said this was actually a good result because it meant we wouldn't have to testify at trial and relive everything in front of a courtroom. Detective Rasmussen called me separately to explain that Colton would now have a criminal record that would follow him forever. She said this would make it much harder for him to get close to other women in the future because background checks would show his stalking conviction. I felt relief knowing he would face real consequences and couldn't hurt us anymore. Melanie found a new apartment in a building with a doorman, security cameras, and controlled access. I helped her move in, and we both upgraded our security systems with better cameras and monitoring. We started having dinner together every Sunday again, just like we used to before Colton entered our lives. The first few dinners felt awkward as we both worked through what happened, but slowly we rebuilt the closeness we'd had before. We both continued therapy, working through the trauma of his manipulation and surveillance. My therapist helped me process the violation of being watched for months without knowing. Melanie's therapist helped her understand that she wasn't stupid for falling for Colton's act, that he deliberately targeted her vulnerability. We talked openly now about our feelings and fears instead of avoiding difficult conversations. Some days were harder than others, but we faced them together. together. I finally felt safe again knowing Colton was locked away in prison where he couldn't watch me, follow me, or hurt either of us.